They woke me long before dawn, long before the ocean had warmed enough to shake off the night's frost. I remember the knock most of all, not the frantic staccato of an emergency alert, not the sharp rapping of a junior sailor too scared to keep his composure, but a single slow knock, followed by another, spaced just enough apart to tell me the messenger was afraid of the answer I would give. I had felt that knock before in my life, the kind that carries the weight of something that should not exist, something that presses down on a man's shoulders long before he understands the details. When I opened the door, Lieutenant Rourke stood in the hallway with his cap in his hand, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet mine. "Sir," he said in a voice just above a whisper, "we found her." I didn't need him to say the name. I already knew. It was the USS Wycliffe, the Cold War destroyer that had vanished into the North Atlantic silence 2 nights prior, swallowed by fog and static in an area known for whispers and weather, but not for losing an entire crew without a single distress call. Command had called it an equipment issue at first, the usual attempt to stop rumors before they form. But everyone on base felt something colder beneath the official statements, something that sat in the gut like a stone. Ships do not simply go silent during routine patrols, not American destroyers, not in those waters, not without leaving evidence of what went wrong. Work told me the search plane spotted the Wycliffe drifting at dawn, moving against the current with her engines still humming. No damage, no smoke, no signs of struggle. Just a ship alone in the gray. I had seen strange things during my career, things wrapped in classifications so deep they barely existed. But nothing prepares you for the words, "The ship is intact, but no one is answering." That was why Command requested me specifically, not for my record, not for my rank, but because I had once handled a situation they never allowed onto paper, a case involving missing men, radio distortion, and a vessel that felt wrong. I never wanted to see something like that again. But the ocean carries its own memory, and sometimes it circles back for you. I dressed in silence, trying to stay my breathing, but the cold in my chest would not settle. The walk down the steel corridor to the waiting jeep felt longer than it should have been, the fluorescent lights flickering in a way that made the shadows lean just a little too far across the walls. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself it was nerves, but deep down, I knew the truth. The Wycliffe had not gone dark for mechanical reasons. Something had reached for that ship. Something had touched it. And whatever had touched it still lingered in the silence between Work's words. Outside, the wind cut across the asphalt like a knife, carrying the sting of salt even though we were still miles from the harbor. Dawn was only a faint smudge on the horizon, but the sky held that early morning stillness that comes right before something breaks. As we drove, Work briefed me in fragments, his voice uneven. The Wycliffe's last transmission had been routine, a weather update, a minor course correction, and a standard status confirmation. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then, less than 1 hour later, her radar return faded into nothing. No static burst, no interference spike, just absence, as though the ship had stepped out of the world for a moment. Listening to him, I felt an old familiar pressure in the back of my skull, the same pressure I had felt during the incident we never documented, the sensation of being watched by something you cannot see, something that is aware of you, even if you try not to be aware of it. That pressure returned now, stronger than it had in years. When we reached the harbor, the fog hung so thick over the water that the lights along the pier glowed like dim halos, swallowed by clouds before they could touch the waves. Our cutter was waiting, engines idling, her crew silent in the way men get when fear has stripped away small talk. They nodded to me, but no one spoke, no one needed to. We all felt the same thing. The Wycliffe was not just missing, she had been taken. As we launched, the cutter cut through the fog like a blade. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of brine and something else beneath it, something metallic, like old blood or overheated wiring. The ocean was too calm for winter waters, unnaturally flat, as if holding something beneath the surface. The closer we came, the more I felt the wrongness in my bones. Then, to the drifting white haze, her shape emerged. The USS Wycliffe, tall and unwavering, her hull dark against the pale fog, lights still burning with eerie steadiness. She looked alive, waiting, expecting, but not a single figure moved on her deck. No watch officer, no deckhand, no lookout. Only silence. And that silence was not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of something paused mid-breath. Something that had stopped time, rather than simply vacated it. I boarded first, stepping onto the metal deck that groaned faintly beneath my boot like a living thing stirring in sleep. The air was warm, too warm for the winter morning, as though bodies had been moving across that deck moments before we arrived. My instincts sharpened, that old cold whisper running along my spine. Ships do not feel warm when abandoned. They feel hollow, dead. But the Wycliffe felt recently touched, as though a full crew had just stepped out of sight. And in that moment, standing on that silent steel giant drifting through the fog, I understood something I never said aloud to Rourke or the others. Whatever had boarded the ship never left. The moment my boots touched the Wycliffe's deck, I felt an unnatural warmth lingering beneath the cold morning air, as if dozens of bodies had been walking there only minutes before a cutter arrived. The fog coiled low across the steel, drifting around my ankles like the breath of something hiding just out of sight. Ships left unattended for even a few hours fall into a stillness that feels obvious, a dead weight, a kind of emptiness you feel in your chest. But the Wycliffe did not feel empty. She felt occupied. She felt observed. The air had that strange, expectant hush, the kind that settles over a room when someone has just left and the atmosphere hasn't caught up to the absence yet. I stood still for a moment, listening. No voices, no footsteps. No machinery whirring incorrectly, only the low hum of engines that should have been shut down long before we reached her. Rourke and the boarding team followed, each man stepping cautiously as if they feared the deck might shift beneath them. "Ship seems stable," Chief Lanson muttered, scanning the length of the destroyer with narrowed eyes, but I could hear the tension in his voice. Stable wasn't the right word. Nothing about this vessel felt stable. The ship sat perfectly trimmed, perfectly balanced, lights still glowing, radar still sweeping in its silent rotation. It felt staged, as though someone, or something, had left the Wycliffe prepared for inspection, but was unwilling to walk us through the details. As we advanced toward the bridge, our footsteps echoed louder than they should have, bouncing back at us in warped undertones that made some of the younger sailors flinch. On a normal ship, sound behaves predictably. But here, each step felt delayed, as though the metal beneath us was thinking before it answered. Inside the passageway leading to the bridge, we found the first sign that the crew had been going about their routine, moments before whatever happened took place. A clipboard lay on the floor near the ladder well, its pages ruffled but uncrumpled. A pen resting beside it as though someone had dropped it mid-thought. The ink on the top sheet was still wet when I touched it with my thumb, smearing slightly. That meant someone had been writing within the last hour. Rourke picked it up, scanning the last entry aloud. Engine temperature logs, regular rotation, nothing off. His voice faltered. So where the hell are they? That was the question none of us dared to ask outright, because we already sensed the answer was not going to be human, rational, or easily contained inside a report. The Wycliffe's disappearance was not a mechanical failure, nor a navigational error, nor even a coordinated mutiny. Something had passed through this ship and erased the people but left behind everything else. Warm systems, unfinished tasks, and a sense of motion halted in mid-width. We reached the bridge, forcing the heavy door open only to find the interior undisturbed, too clean, too composed. A half-written message sat on the communications console, the final word trailing off as if someone's hand had been pulled away from the paper. The captain's chair was rotated slightly, facing the radar station instead of the forward window. A mug sat beside it, enamel chipped on the rim, and inside it the coffee was still steaming. I remember staring at that rising curl of heat, feeling the cold dread tightening inside my chest. "Fresh," Lansing whispered. "Minutes old." That was the moment the atmosphere shifted for every man on that bridge. The air felt thicker, heavier, pressing down with a weight you couldn't see. One of the younger sailors swallowed hard and whispered, "Sir, did we just miss them?" I didn't have the heart to tell him what my instincts were already screaming. We hadn't missed them by minutes. We had arrived exactly when we were meant to. The ship had been waiting. Rourke checked the consoles, radars warm. Autopilot still active. Someone left this running intentionally. He pointed at the heading, a fixed line toward open sea, unchanging. They didn't drift. They held this course. There was no damage, no alarms, no sign of sabotage. Whatever happened to the Wycliffe's crew, it did not come with chaos or violence. It came with silence, a silence so complete it felt designed. The kind of silence that makes a man feel small in the presence of something vast and unseen. I walked to the forward window, staring out across the fog-coated water. The horizon looked normal, a flat stretch of gray ocean, a thick veil of morning mist, but my eyes kept catching on shadows in the peripheral edges of my vision, shapes that vanished when I turned to look directly. Maybe reflections, maybe tricks of the fog, or maybe remnants of whatever had been here when the crew vanished. We swept the rest of the bridge, documenting everything. Every console was active, every system was running. It was as if the destroyer had been carefully maintained by invisible hands. Work replayed the last radio buffer, static, a burst of wind, the faint rustle of a uniform, and then nothing. No distress call, no scream. Just the sound of a room with people in it who did not realize they were about to disappear. They didn't know, I murmured, running my hand across the rail. Whatever happened, it came without warning. The lights flickered once, a faint dimming, barely noticeable, but enough to make every man tense. The fog outside pressed more firmly against the glass, rolling like smoke from a hidden fire. We moved deeper into the ship, leaving the bridge behind as the corridor stretched forward in long metallic tunnels. The air grew warmer as we descended, the soft thrum of the engines reverberating through the walls. That warmth bothered me. It wasn't consistent with a ship left unattended. Heat dissipates, systems cool. But here, the warmth almost felt like breath, the remnants of life where no life remained. We reached the central corridor leading toward the mess hall, and that was when the true realization settled over me like a shadow. The Wycliffe had not simply been abandoned. She had been interrupted, frozen mid-stride. Suspended in a moment she could not escape. And in that suspended moment, something was still here with us. When we pushed through the swinging door of the mess hall, the smell hit first. Fresh coffee, rich and bitter, curling through the air with impossible warmth. The pot sat on the stainless steel counter, steam rising steadily. On the table beside it, a mug had been filled halfway. No spill, no rush, just a perfect, precise pour, as though the person holding it had set it down calmly, intending to return, but they never did. Work's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sir, they were here." I looked around the room, the empty seats, the faint vibration in the steel floor, the soft hum of untouched appliances still running. And I felt it again, the sensation of eyes watching from just beyond the corner of vision. Not hostile, not panicked, simply aware. The ship was occupied, not by a crew, but by something that had replaced the need for one. "Stay tight," I ordered. "No one moves along." The men nodded, but I could see the unease settling into their bones. The Wycliffe was becoming a living presence around us, a breathing corridor, a humming body, a warm machine that seemed to react to our steps. And as we prepared to search the lower decks, I realized something chilling. We were not investigating a disappearance. We were stepping into the aftermath of an encounter we were never meant to witness. Something had passed through this ship, something silent, something precise. Something that left everything functioning except the people. And whatever it was not gone. The farther we moved from the mess hall, the more the Wycliffe began to feel like a photograph of a living ship, rather than the ship itself, as if someone had captured her mid-motion and pressed her into a moment she couldn't escape from. The passage lights glowed with steady, unnatural clarity, untouched by flicker or failure, casting long corridors of soft yellow that should have brought comfort, but only revealed how painfully empty everything was. I kept waiting for the usual signs of panic: overturned chairs, dropped equipment, stray belongings, anything that showed human urgency, but the Wycliffe carried none of that. Her silence wasn't the result of chaos. It was the result of order interrupted, a kind of surgical removal, and that thought clawed at the back of my mind as we made our way toward the outer deck. When we stepped through the hatch onto the starboard walkway, the cold air rushed across us, thick with fog and the faint metallic tang of seawater. And that was when we saw them. the footprints. At first they seemed normal, spaced in clean intervals, left by the standard deck boots the Navy issued. But as we followed the trail along the outer walkway, I felt the hair rise at the back of my neck. The pattern circled the ship, once, twice, then again, and again. The tracks overlapped in odd ways, no longer forming steady strides but merging into each other, like someone had begun pacing, then walking faster, then running in tight, desperate loops. Lansing crouched to inspect one of the prints, dragging his glove along the heel. "Fresh," he muttered. "No moisture, no erosion. These were made recently." His words didn't surprise me. The warmth on the deck, the fresh coffee, the wet ink on clipped reports, all signs of a crew that should have been here but wasn't. The trail tightened near the aft section, where the last cluster of prints grew narrower and closer together, like the man had been turning in sharp circles, unsure of where to go. Then the footsteps stopped abruptly at the railing. No sneer on the metal, no shift in weight, no hesitation, as if whoever had been walking had simply stepped over the edge voluntarily. Mork leaned over the rail, scanning the black water below. "No one falls from here clean," he said quietly. "There'd be scuff marks, something." But there was nothing, just a perfect, final imprint at the edge of the deck, the kind that suggested certainty rather than panic, and that certainty was far more terrifying than chaos ever could be. We documented the pattern, moving along the walkway to examine another trail near the port side. That was when we discovered it wasn't just one set of prints, it was many, different boot sizes, different weights, different strides. Multiple sailors had walked the same loops, the same circles, the same slow and then frantic paths toward the rail. One path even showed a sailor dragging his fingertips along the metal bulkhead, leaving faint streaks where the condensation had smeared under his touch. That was the moment the dread settled deep into my spine, something cold and certain whispering that the crew hadn't run from something. They had followed something, something they trusted, or something they didn't understand. The fog pressed closer around the ship as we continued, the pale gray never breaking, as if the sky refused to show us the horizon. When we returned to the main deck, I stopped my team with a raised hand. "Listen," I said. At first they heard nothing, then Lansing stiffened. "Sir," the static. It was faint, almost imperceptible, bleeding through the air like a distant radio signal carried by wind rather than wires. A soft, rhythmic pulse, not mechanical, not environmental. The kind of sound that settles deep in the bones rather than the ears. We moved toward the CIC, the Combat Information Center, where the signal seemed strongest. My instincts were already screaming warnings, the same kind of instinct that had saved my life more than once during classified operations the Navy would never acknowledge existed. Inside the CIC, the air felt heavier, warmer, as if the room had been recently occupied. The consoles glowed with steady light. Not a single switch had been flipped off. Work powered up the buffer transmissions, routing them through the internal speakers. The room filled with a low hum of static, layered and dense. Then, beneath it, something else, a pattern, a cadence. Not words, but intention. The frequency was too low to be purely mechanical, too structured to be random noise. I leaned closer as the pulse rhythm shifted, rising and lowering in subtle waves. Then came the moment that chilled every man in that room. The pattern broke, a whisper threaded through the static. Not English, not identifiable, but unmistakably directed toward us. McBride paled, clutching the headphones tighter. "Sir, it's saying something." "No," I told him instinctively, but even I didn't believe my own answer. The whisper rose again, clearer this time, slipping through the static like a breath against the ear. A single word, not shouted, not begged, simply spoken, with soft, patient certainty. "Turn." The moment the word faded, the lights in the CIC flickered, just for a heartbeat. My stomach dropped. The whisper had matched the same direction the footprints on deck had taken. The loops, the circles, the final step toward the rail. It wasn't a word of warning, it was a command, or an invitation. McBride stumbled backward, his breath shaking. I grabbed him by the shoulder, grounding him before whatever had brushed against his mind could sink deeper. He blinked hard, unfocused, whispering. I felt it, behind my eyes. He wasn't lying. That was the worst part. Something had reached for him, not physically, but mentally. We shut down the systems immediately, killing the power to the buffered audio. The room grew dimmer, quieter, but the sense of being watched only intensified. On the far wall, a single display flickered even though it was supposed to be offline. A faint blur of static drifted across the screen, like movement glimpsed through fog. No shape, no form, just presence. I stepped closer, and the static seemed to respond, sharpening for a moment, as if attempting to focus on me. I backed away. "We're done here," I said. "Regroup on deck, now." No one argued, not after hearing the whisper, not after watching McBride nearly lose himself to whatever had spoken. As we exited the CIC, the fog outside pressed against the windows with unnatural density, swirling in slow patterns that mirrored the rhythm of the static pulse. The footsteps on deck, the whisper, the lingering warmth. Everything pointed to the same truth. The crew had not been taken by force. They had been drawn, lured by something that bypassed fear and logic, and moved straight into the part of the mind that responds without question. The Wycliffe had not lost her crew. She had surrendered them willingly to something that understood humans better than humans understand themselves. And in that moment, stepping back onto the open deck with my team close and silent, I realized something colder than the wind biting at my face. Whatever had whispered to the crew was still whispering. The walk back to the bridge felt longer than it should have, as if the Wycliffe's corridors were stretching while we moved, subtly shifting their length by inches, maybe even feet, in ways the mind notices only subconsciously. The steel walls seemed to breathe with a warm hum that didn't fit the cold, dead ocean outside. Each step we took echoed faintly behind us a second too late, creating the unsettling illusion that someone was following closely, matching our pace, but always one breath behind. McBride stayed close to me, still pale from the whisper and the static, his fingertips trembling whenever he brushed against a bulkhead or a handrail. When I asked him if he felt sick, he didn't answer at first. He just stared straight ahead, voice thin. "Sir, it didn't sound like a radio." I didn't press him. I already knew he was right. Radios carry interference, distortion, electrical residue, but the whisper we heard had breath in it, intention, a sense of direction, like it was leaning forward to reach us. When we reached the upper deck, the fog outside had thickened into a wall of shifting gray. It pressed against the windows like a living membrane, eager to seep in through the smallest gaps. The ship groaned softly, not with stress, but with something closer to discomfort, a low, organic sound that made the men freeze until the noise faded. I knew better than to show fear, but even I felt the weight of something unseen pressing against my ribs. The Wycliffe was reacting to us, or reacting to whatever had been awakened by our presence. The air carried a faint vibration, like the echo of a held note, deep enough to bypass the ears and settle in the chest. Rourke touched his sternum and whispered, "You feel that?" I nodded. It felt like a heartbeat, but not ours. We gathered outside the bridge hatch. I held up a hand to steady the team. Inside, keep formation. No wandering. No staring too long at anything you can't identify. The men nodded. Even Lansing, the one man on the team who never rattled, looked tense. When I pushed the door open, the bridge lights shimmered faintly, a soft pulse, not a flicker, as though the ship were breathing with us. The consoles glowed, untouched since we left, but the air had changed. It smelled faintly of ozone and something else beneath it, a warm metallic scent, the kind that lingers after lightning strikes too close. Rourke moved to the communication station first, his hands cautious, almost reverent. He powered up the buffers again, this time isolating the frequency band where McBride had heard the whisper. The speakers crackled softly. Static rolled through the room like a fog of sound, each pulse carrying that same unsettling rhythm we had felt earlier in the CIC. McBride flinched, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. "It's still there," he whispered. "Sir, it's still talking." The idea unsettled me in a way few things ever had. Not that something had spoken through the static, but that it continued to speak even after the crew was gone, even after we had shut everything down. As if it was patient, Rourke adjusted the gain, slowly bringing the frequency forward. What emerged was not human, not mechanical. A low, pulsing tone layered with dissonant harmonics, shifting like a living thing. Then it happened again, that whisper threading through the tone like a needle pulling through cloth. This time the word carried weight, not merely sound, but pressure. McBride gasped, stumbling back as blood rushed from his face. Lansing grabbed him under the arms, lowering him to a chair as McBride's eyes unfocused, pupils dilating unnaturally wide. "I felt it, inside my head," he muttered. "Not a sound, a direction." I knelt beside him. "Look at me, sailor." He met my eyes, breath trembling. "Sir, it doesn't want us to hear it. It wants us to follow it." Those words chilled the room more effectively than the ocean wind ever could. If the whisper was a lure, a cognitive pull, then the crew hadn't simply vanished. They had obeyed, walked in circles until the thought overpowered their instincts, walked to the rail, stepped off. Not because they were chased, but because they were called. The Wycliffe silence wasn't the aftermath of an attack. It was the lingering echo of obedience, a command carried across frequencies we weren't meant to perceive. Work shut down the console abruptly, the hum cutting off mid-pulse. But even after the speakers fell silent, the whisper seemed to linger in the air, like a fading afterimage on the retina, a memory formed by something non-human, refusing to be dismissed. The lights dimmed again, subtly, but enough to make every man stiffen. The fog pressed harder against the windows, rolling in slow, deliberate motions that looked almost like shapes forming beneath the surface. Not humanoid, not definable. Just suggestions of movement. Lansing exhaled sharply. "Sir, we should get off this ship." He wasn't wrong, but something in me knew the Wycliffe wasn't finished revealing itself. I could feel it in the air, that same pressure behind the skull that comes before radio transmission, but deeper, more invasive. Something was still here with us, not physically, but in the structure, in the circuits. In the vibration of every hull plate, whatever had reached the crew had woven itself into the ship like an infection, lingering in the machinery, the metal, the very air, and now it was watching us. Work pointed to the radar console, voice low. "Sir, look." The scope was active, despite being manually powered down. The sweep line pulsed slowly, casting a soft glow across the room. And there, near the center, a faint return flickered. No shape, no coordinates, just a pulse responding to the ship's heartbeat, the same rhythm we felt in our chests. "Is that contact?" Lansing whispered. "No," I answered. "It's resonance." The frequency pulse, the whisper, the footprints circling the deck, the warm systems, the lingering breath in the air, all of it pointed to a presence that couldn't be measured by instruments, but could influence them, manipulate them, communicate through them. The Wycliffe wasn't drifting by accident. She was drifting under guidance. The static crackled again, low and soft, like a sigh. Then the whisper came back, clearer this time, closer, as if leaning over our shoulders. "Turn." McBride gripped his head, groaning. "Sir, we shouldn't be here." The fog outside pulsed against the windows, distorting the light like an immense shape exhaling through the mist. My instincts screamed that whatever the crew had followed was circling us now, invisible but aware. The Wycliffe felt less like a vessel and more like a mouth trying to close around us. I stood, voice steady despite the dread clawing beneath my ribs. "We're done here. Everyone fall back to the main deck. Stay tight, stay alert, and do not, under any circumstances, listen to anything that sounds like your own thoughts." As we moved to exit the bridge, the whisper drifted one last time through the static, softer, almost fond, like a voice calling a name it already knew. "Turn." McBride gripped his head, groaning. "Sir, we shouldn't be here." The fog outside pulsed against the windows, distorting the white like an immense shape exhaling through the mist. My instincts screamed that whatever the crew had followed was circling us now, invisible but aware. The Wycliffe felt less like a vessel and more like a mouth trying to close around us. I stood, voice steady despite the dread clawing beneath my ribs. "We're done here. Everyone fall back to the main deck. Stay tight, stay alert, and do not, under any circumstances, listen to anything that sounds like your own thoughts." As we moved to exit the bridge, the whisper drifted one last time through the static, softer, almost fond, like a voice calling a name it already knew. Turn. Every man froze for one fraction of a heartbeat. Then we forced ourselves forward. The Wycliffe had spoken enough. The descent into the lower decks felt like stepping into the throat of something alive, a narrowing passageway where the air thickened with every rung of the ladder. The warmth we noticed earlier grew heavier, clinging to our skin in a way that made sweat bead along the collar, even though the temperature outside was cold enough to numb exposed fingers. Ships are not supposed to feel warm below deck, not unless the engineering crew has been working recently. But every man on my team knew no one had touched the Wycliffe's inner systems for hours, maybe longer. Yet the deeper we went, the more the air felt lived in, as if bodies had moved through the corridors just before our arrival. The sensation was wrong in a way that couldn't be explained by malfunction or environmental error. It felt like breath, like heat rising from something that wasn't human. The hallway stretched into dim pools of yellow light, each bulb humming with a low vibration that buzzed faintly in the skull. Warwick clicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the haze. "Sir," he muttered, "why does it smell like welding down here?" It did, a faint metallic sting, sharp enough to irritate the back of the throat, the kind of scent you get when steel has been recently cut or fused. But the engineering log showed no maintenance scheduled for days. Lansing crouched beside a ventilation grate, hesitating before touching the metal. "Warm," he whispered, "almost hot." That unsettled all of us. Heat doesn't linger in cold water like this, not unless something produced it from inside the ship, something active, something ongoing. We reached the machine shop, a compartment normally cluttered with tools, spare parts, rags, and gears scattered across metal shelves. But the moment we stepped inside, every man froze. The entire workbench had been arranged with unnatural precision. Not neat, not tidy, precise. Tools aligned by size, wenches perfectly parallel, gauges arranged in an exact semicircle like a ritual layout. Every surface wiped down until it gleamed. At the center of the bench sat a chalk circle, drawn over and over, layer upon layer, until the metal beneath had been scraped raw by repeated tracing. The chalk dust had fallen in a perfect ring, no smears, no scuffs. That meant the markings were made carefully, repeatedly, obsessively. Lansing rubbed the glove finger along the outer line. "Sir," he whispered, "this wasn't written in a hurry." I felt that familiar cold coil in my stomach. "No," I said. "It wasn't written at all. It was followed." Warwick moved toward the far corner where a toolbox lay open. Inside, metal components had been sorted into patterns that didn't match any repair procedure or engineering protocol I had ever seen. Curves arranged into spirals, bolts lined in sequences that looked closer to symbols than tools. "This is deliberate," Warwick murmured, eyes narrowing. "It's like they were building something, or listening to something. Listening." The word hit me harder than I expected, because it matched what we had heard in the static, that low pulse, that whisper threading through the unseen frequencies. The chalk circles weren't instructions, they were anchors, places where the crew had stood, turned, walked in loops. Then McBride stiffened. "Sir, the air." I felt it too, pressure building in my ears, like the moment before a submarine emergency blow, except quieter, internal, psychological, a sound you didn't hear but sensed. A low hum rising through the floor, almost inaudible, vibrating through the soles of our boots. That hum deepened with every breath, threading itself into the bones, into the mind. The men shifted uneasily. Even Lansing, who never rattled, clenched his jaw. "Sir," he muttered, "something's moving through the metal." He wasn't wrong. The ship felt as though a current, not electrical, not mechanical, flowed beneath the deck plates. A pulse that wasn't coming from the engines at all. We continued toward the engine room, each step heavier than the last. The warmth intensified, the lighting dimmed slightly, as though the bulbs were breathing with us. When we reached the central junction, the hum peaked into a soft vibration that made the walls tremble just enough for the eye to catch. Warwick checked the gauges. "Engines are steady," he said, but his voice faltered. "Too steady. Engine rooms are never silent. They roar, they groan, they scream with industrial life. But here, the machinery vibrated with a slow, measured rhythm, calm, almost serene, like a heart beating in meditation. The kind of steady cadence no ship makes on its own. Then we found them, the final markings, chalk circles etched into the steel floor in perfect alignment, spaced evenly around the primary generator. These were larger, drawn with deliberate force, deep enough to scratch the paint, and inside them, faint footprints, not chaotic, not rushed, positioned as if the sailors had stood there willingly, waiting, listening. "Sir," McBride whispered, "they were here." But he wasn't just talking about the crew. He meant something else, something that had been in the room with them, something they had been facing. The hum beneath the deck rose again, a deep, resonant thrum that made each man sway as though the ship were shifting. But it wasn't the Wycliffe that moved, it was the air. The air pressed inward, filling the room with a palpable presence. Not a figure, not a shadow. A sensation, cold and aware, watching, feeling us, searching for openings in our thoughts the way a current searches for cracks in the hull. Lansing stepped back, breathing hard. "Sir," he hissed, "we need to get out of here." He was right. Every instinct I had screamed that we were standing inside something that wasn't meant for human senses, something that communicated through vibration, through repetition, through the unconscious part of the mind sailors rely on during long nights at sea. I gave the order to pull back. And as we retreated up the passage, leaving the machine shop behind, I couldn't shake the realization that chilled me deeper than the whisper ever had. The Wycliffe hadn't just lost her crew, she had learned how to keep one. By the time we reached the mid-deck corridor again, every man in my team was breathing like he'd run a marathon, even though none of us had moved faster than a cautious walk. The air felt different now, heavier, denser, as if the ship had closed its lungs around us. The warmth from below deck clung to our skin, mixing with the cold fog drifting in through the ventilation shafts, creating a clammy sensation that tightened around the spine. I could feel it behind my ribs, the same way you feel a storm gathering long before it hits the water. Something had begun to stir in the Wycliffe's bones, something aware of us. Something adjusting to our presence the way a sleeper adjusts to a noise in the dark. We regrouped outside the crew quarters. Dozens of bunks stretched beyond the closed hatch, a maze of narrow aisles and personal gear. The kind of place where sailors laughed, complained, slept through long watches, dreamed of home. But in that moment, staring at the door, the idea of stepping inside felt like trespassing on something sacred or something claimed. Lansing reached for the handle, hesitated for one fraction of a second, then pulled it open. The hinges groaned softly, not the usual metal-on-metal grind, more like a sigh. The interior was quiet, untouched, too neat. Uniforms folded with military precision, boots aligned beneath each bunk, personal items placed carefully on shelves as though the men expected to return any minute. But the silence wrapped around the room like a thick blanket, swallowing our footsteps before they touched the floor. "Sir," Work whispered, "there's breathing in here." I froze. He wasn't wrong. There it was, a slow inhale, long and deep, followed by an equally measured exhale, too steady, too calm, the kind of breathing someone makes when they're lying in a bunk half asleep, except every bunk was empty. We swept the first aisle, flashlights cutting across pillows, blankets, neatly arranged gear. Nothing. But the breathing continued, closer, louder, almost directly behind us. Lansing spun, weapon raised. Nothing. Just the thin fog drifting through the overhead vents, swirling softly as though stirred by unseen hands. "Should we fall back?" McBride whispered, his voice cracking at the edges. "No," I said, "not yet." Because something inside me had started to piece the pattern together. The footprints circling the deck, the chalk rings around the machinery, the voice in the static whispering commands. And now this, breathing with no body to produce it. The Wycliffe wasn't empty, she was imprinted. Her crew had been absorbed not into the water, but into the ship itself. The breathing shifted again, this time behind the next row of bunks. The men tensed, spreading into a controlled formation. I stepped forward alone. Partly because I outranked them, partly because I refused to let whatever was in that room sense weakness in the group. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous, resisting each step. I reached the end of the aisle and leaned past the last bunk, expecting nothing and everything at once. And I saw it, not a figure, not a silhouette, but a distortion of the air, like the shimmer of heat rising from asphalt. It pulsed once, matching the rhythm of the static we had heard. Then a whisper drifted over my shoulder, inches from my ear. "Ton." Not from the air, not from the vents, from a spot directly behind me. I spun, adrenaline slamming through my chest. Nothing. But the bunk sheets nearest the hatch rippled, as if someone had just stood up from them. McBride stumbled back in panic, his hand hitting a metal locker. It swung open, revealing a uniform hanging inside. Pristine, unworn, the name tag still crisp, but printed deep into the fabric near the collar, faint and unnatural, was a smear of chalk, the same chalk we had seen around the generator. The sailors hadn't abandoned their uniforms, they had stepped out of them. The breathing returned, this time, surrounding the room from every direction. Too many breaths. Dozens, maybe the entire crew, lingering like an echo trapped in steel. Work's voice trembled. "Sir, they're here." He was right. Not alive, not dead. Present in the ship's metal, and the vibration of the air, and the static hum that threaded through every bulkhead, and the presence had grown aware of us, observing, learning, studying how we reacted. Then everything shifted at once. The fog outside pressed hard against the windows, darkening the light in the corridor. The deck beneath our boots vibrated in a slow, deep pulse that matched the breath inside the room. The temperature dropped sharply, ripping a shiver through the team. And McBride, poor kid, pressed a hand to his temple, collapsing to one knee. "Sir," he gasped, "get it out. It's in my head." Lansing knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "Stay with me, sailor." But McBride wasn't hearing Lansing. He was hearing something else, something internal, something reaching for him the way a hook reaches through water. His eyes unfocused, pupils dilating. "It wants us," he whispered. "It wants us to come closer." The whisper returned, not through sound but through thought, a vibration threading behind the eyes. "Turn." The command grew stronger, pulling at the edges of consciousness like an undertow. For a moment, even I felt the pressure, the subtle pull toward the open deck, toward the place the crew had vanished. But instinct, old, battle-worn instinct, snapped me back. I grabbed McBride under the arms, hauling him to his feet. "Fall back," I ordered, my voice echoing through the steel like a flare. Now, every man obeyed, fear overriding curiosity. We backed into the corridor, sealing the hatch behind us as the unseen breathing faded into a low, rhythmic hum. The Wycliffe didn't chase us. She didn't have to. She had learned patience. As we were treated toward the ladder well, McBride trembling between Lansing and Work, the realization settled into my chest with the weight of an anchor. We were not alone on that ship. We never had been. And whatever had claimed the crew was waking up. By the time we reached the main deck again, the fog had thickened into something that barely resembled weather. It pressed low across the steel, rolling in slow tides like it had weight and intention. The moment my boots touched the open walkway, I felt the shift, a subtle drop in temperature, a tightening around the lungs, the sensation of being watched not by eyes but by atmosphere. The hum beneath the deck had grown deeper, carrying a rhythm that synchronized with the pulse behind the skull. Lansing steadied McBride with one arm, keeping the kid upright as his breathing came in short, panic bursts. "Sir," Lansing whispered, "it's stronger up here." And he was right. Whatever intelligence threaded itself through the Wycliffe systems, whatever presence had spoken in the static or breathed in the crew quarters, it was now focused on us completely. The fog curled around the railings like fingers. Work swung his flashlight in quick arcs, but the beam dissolved into the gray before it reached more than a few feet. "Visibility's dropping too fast," he muttered. "Feels like it's pushing in on purpose." That idea wasn't paranoia. Not now. Not after everything we had seen below deck. The Wycliffe wasn't just a ship anymore. She was host to something that understood proximity, pressure, resonance. Something that learned how to steer human thought the same way a helmsman adjusts a rudder. And the longer we stayed, the more it studied us, the more it pressed. That became undeniable when the low-frequency vibration rippled through the deck plates with a pulse timed exactly to our footfalls. Almost like it was following our rhythm, matching our movement, learning our patterns. We reached the bow as a sudden shift rippled through the fog. Not wind, a movement, something large, something formless. The railing groaned under a pressure I could not see. McBride stiffened, eyes wide, staring at the open sea. "Sir, someone's standing out there." His voice cracked in a way that made every man look. But there was nothing. No figure, no outline. Just the fog. Except, the longer I stared into that shifting gray, the more I felt the same pull the crew must have felt. A gentle invitation, a whisper layered beneath silence, urging me toward the edge of the deck. Not yelled, not forced. Spoken almost lovingly, a suggestion placed inside the mind. A whisper rose in the air, but not through sound, through thought. Turn. The same command, the same lure. But stronger now, closer now, threaded into the fog like a voice drifting from just beneath the surface of the ocean. McBride took one unsteady step toward the bow. Lansing grabbed him fast, slanting him back against a bulkhead. The kid gasped, shaking violently, tears streaking down his face. "It's inside," he whispered. "It doesn't need sound. It can speak from anywhere." The realization settled over the deck like ice. The Wycliffe's crew hadn't jumped. They hadn't been dragged. They had been guided. The whisper wasn't a message. It was a neurological key, a suggestion placed deep enough to bypass instinct entirely. We moved as a unit toward the midship ladder well, trying to get off the open deck, but the fog pressed harder, pulsing against the ship with a rhythm too deliberate to be nature. Work stopped suddenly, staring down at the deck plating. "Sir, the footprints. They were back. Not fresh, not old. New, forming in the thin film of dew on the steel as we watched, step by step, moving toward us in slow, patient strides. No bodies, no shadows. Just the impressions of boots materializing, one after another, exactly matching the size and pattern of standard Navy issue. The footprints of men who no longer existed. Men who had left this world in silence. Men who had obeyed the whisper." The deck groaned again, not under weather, not under waves, but under presence. A shifting of weight that wasn't physical but perceptual, like the entire ship was leaning closer to hear us breathe. The hum beneath the metal deepened, thrumming against the ribs like a second heartbeat. And then, from somewhere behind the fog, a faint metallic clang echoed across the water. Not random, not accidental. A deliberate sound, a signal. Work's voice trembled. "Sir, something out there is calling back." I didn't want to believe it, but the truth sat heavy and certain. The Wycliffe wasn't drifting alone. She was in communication with something beyond the fog, something the crew had followed willingly, unknowingly, inevitably. I raised my voice over the rising vibration. "Move! All hands back to the cutter, now!" Fear tore through the team, but discipline held. Lansing hauled McBride toward the ladder. Work covered our flank, one hand trembling on the railing as the fog pressed so close I could barely distinguish deck from sky. The whisper returned again, intimate and patient. "Turn." It came from the air, from the steel, from inside the skull. And for a moment, one terrible moment, I felt myself wanting to obey. But instinct, survival, and a lifetime of refusing to bow to the unknown snapped me out of it. We reached the cutter at the starboard davits, lowering her so fast the winch screeched in protest. The fog tried to follow, curling over the rail, reaching down like tendrils searching for warmth. We hit the water hard, the small craft rocking violently as Rourke throttled the engine. Lansing held McBride down, the kid whispering the word "turn" over and over, as if trying to shake it free from his mind. Only when we were a good distance out did I look back at the Wycliffe. The destroyer drifted in the fog, her lights glowing faintly like eyes watching us leave. The radar spun, the engines hummed, and on her bow, the footprints continued forming. One step, then another, leading toward the rail, leading nowhere, leading forever. The Navy scuttled the Wycliffe 3 days later. They destroyed her without boarding her again, without retrieving a single body, without trying to salvage even one record. The official report claims structural compromise, risk of catastrophic failure, a lie so thin it barely attempted disguise. They didn't need the ship, They didn't want the truth. They wanted silence. But some nights, when radio checks cross the North Atlantic, a faint pulse still bleeds through the static, a familiar cadence. A whisper spoken softly through circuits that should have died decades ago. Turn. And every time I hear it, the part of me that survived the Wycliffe feels something cold and patient curling behind my ribs, as if the ship remembers me, as if the whisper's waiting. Some mysteries vanish with time, swallowed by the ocean and buried under classified ink. But others, they linger. The Wycliffe was supposed to be forgotten, sealed beneath miles of water and a wall of silence thicker than steel. Yet even now, years later, I still hear that faint heartbeat in the static, the quiet pulse of a ship that should not exist, whispering from a place no map acknowledges. Some nights, when the radio hisses at the edge of sleep, I swear I feel the deck tilting beneath my boots again, and I remember every reason I should never go back. If you want me to keep opening these sealed files and dragging the truth into the light, stories they still don't want you hearing, then hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps these declassified reports alive, and it keeps me moving forward instead of listening too closely to the whispers behind me. This is Captain Rebel, signing off. Stay sharp, stay curious, and never, ever follow the static.